Good evening, everyone, and apologies for the late start. Speakers having some technical issues. Hopefully things are fixed, but I think it's just there's a bit of sort of slowness going on. Things opening up, things loading up. So I'm just going to press ahead with the introduction just now, and hopefully that will give John a bit of time to get things to function properly. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first talk of the new programme. As always, we have a varied and exciting lineup of talks prepared, and the details which will be shortly made available. A few things before I introduce the speaker. Well, really just one thing. Our members have been asked to have their say on when or if we should return to real-life talks, which could be as early as next month. Thank you if you've completed the little questionnaire, but if you haven't, please do, as obviously the more people that respond, the more representative the decision will be. Turning to tonight's speaker, we have Dr. John Ennis, a native of Northern Ireland and educated in Lisburn, County Antrim, before entering Edinburgh University to study medicine. He graduated as both a Bachelor of Medicine and also in surgery. John then went into family practice with Lothian Health Board from 1996 to 2012. At that time, John also had commitments for research and developments in the fields of health services for young people in care, and also palliative care at home. The research, along with his experiences as a GP, eventually brought about a dramatic career change. John recognised and understood just who are the most vulnerable in our communities, and therefore in the need of greater advocacy and support. His firm belief is that inequalities act against a fair shot at life. In 2012, John stepped away from medicine in order to pursue a passion for design, with the absolute belief that mindful design can enable greater well-being. This belief in the power of mindful design finds focus in his long-term project, Journeys in Design. Tonight's talk is about one such journey, the journey of linen in Fife. The talk will also touch on aspects of the industry in our local area. We're delighted that John has agreed to open our session this evening, especially as he stands on the eve of Scotland's first festival of flax and linen. John and his team have organised this unique festival to run over the course of the next 3 weekends, with talks, workshops, walks and exhibitions in some of the towns and villages once synonymous with the industry, and it all takes off tomorrow in Kirkcaldy. Doubtless John will provide details of the project and programme, including that of Saturday the 11th of September, when Markinch plays its part. This local segment is in no small way thanks to the effort of our committee member, Christine Manson. Look out for further information, as there will be an exhibition in the 252 hall. With all that said, it's now time to sit back and hear the fascinating story of Scotland's premier flax and linen county. I give you John Ennis.
Neil, thank you so much for that introduction. And you're mentioning that mindful design and well-being are linked. I'm feeling particularly unwell because my PowerPoint is not engaging. So I know there has been a delay this evening. I apologize for that. There's some apparently mismatch here with the software. So I'm going to just take 30 more seconds to try and engage the talk that I prepared for you tonight. It's a mystery why it's not popping up on the screen, so please keep your fingers crossed, and hopefully we'll have something to look at. I'm clicking away in buttons in the back, and there seems very little response for some reason. Goodness me. So I'm getting some strange message about group root not right to perform the thing. I'm gonna just start with a little conversation before we engage with the PowerPoint. Neil, thank you for the introduction, as I say, and in particular, thanks for mentioning Christine. I'd just like to say a personal thank you to both Alan Crombie and Christine Manson. Alan introduced me to the group here and talked very much about the commitment of the Markinch Heritage Group and how engaged you all were. And I've had the great privilege in the last 3 years to be working across the country on a particular programme from Journey to Design called Our Linen Stories. And it's taken me up and down Scotland. We chose 4 centres in particular because they were very resonant of the heritage of linen in Scotland. In the Borders, we went to Selkirk, and although that was mainly a woolen tradition, there was linen there and bleach fields, important bleach fields in Melrose. In Lothian, we went to Leith, and we focused mainly on the maritime heritage and the creative powers that were around when the industry first took off in the 1720s, and we'll come back to that. We went up to the Highlands to, first of all, in Newtonmore, the Highland Folk Museum, and then to Granton, one of the Highland linen towns, settled actually to calm the unruly Highlanders. It was felt that by offering some employment, there would be an opportunity to calm and settle what was, of course, a rebellious part of Scotland at the time. And Granton is a classic, Huntly another one, and folk may know, they were actually built around a linen centre with a bleach field planned, a linen mill planned. It lasted no more than perhaps 20, 25 years in these areas, but it was an important attempt, so we went there too. But of all the places that we went, it was Fife that really, I guess, stole my heart. You might wonder what on earth I might be interested in linen for. Neil mentioned Lisburn, which is a linen town in Northern Ireland. And Kirkcaldy struck me in particular as a very similar sort of town, very much a working town, and really based around the linen industry. And I was then lucky enough to bring our exhibition, our Linen Stories core exhibition, to Lisburn and to Belfast the following year, and draw out not linen links in Northern Ireland, but linen links between Scotland and Northern Ireland. And the intention of our Linen Stories is to continue building those links with our neighbour linen nations, and in particular with Holland, Belgium, and Northern France. 85% of the long fibre flax, which is the plant from which you get linen, 85% grown around the world for long fibre linen is in that broad band across from northern France, Flanders, into Amsterdam, Holland as far as Amsterdam. So what's been lovely, in particular in a focus for our channeling our Linen Stories, is to work with communities across Fife to celebrate a festival. So why might a festival be appropriate rather than a rolling series of exhibitions? Well, I think this is where the notion of well-being comes into it for me. There's something ritual about a festival. There's something communal about a festival. And that notion really encapsulates a lot of what Journeys in Design is about. Neil is texting me. I'm just going to take that. And I think that's a very good idea if I can email the PowerPoint to Neil. In fact, I can't even open it, but let's give it another go. And hopefully it won't be just my Oh my goodness, it says starting. You see, just giving it that short space. It says starting, it hasn't started yet.
Even if it doesn't open, John, because you've got the file, you might be able to attach it and send
exactly. It's now engaged, and the program is open. It's allowing me to double click on Mark Inch Heritage Group, fingers crossed. And we hopefully will get some imagery coming up shortly. I have to say, there's nothing to do with Neil, who's a bit of a master of tech and has set this up wonderfully. This is my issue at my end, so apologies everyone for that. Where are we?
I mean, it's strange, isn't it, John? Because at the rehearsal, it was fine.
Now, what's happened is, oh no, here we go. Let's fingers crossed. It does say PowerPoint not responding now, so that occasionally resolves itself. So I just wanted to mention again then, coming back to the notion of festival and community. So the essence of Journeys in Design is actually being out and about in communities and gathering stories on the ground. And what's been frustrating for all of us in the last year and a half and several months is that lack of ability to come together. So it seems the right time to be moving with the notion of a festival. We'll come back to that, but I have to say a huge thank you not only to Christine and others in Mark Hinch, but also to the 12 different communities around Fife that have been asked to engage and have really responded marvelously. This festival is, of course, slightly smaller scale than we would wish, for obvious reasons, but this festival is just as much about the next one and that notion that a ritual revisiting and a deepening of understanding lets that happen. So I'm going to call up PowerPoint again. Yes. It's very slowly certainly got the right slides up. Okay, fingers crossed. The first slide is up, and I'm going to attempt to share screen while the rest of them click in. I don't want to jinx it, so I'm just going to pause while the whole thing loads up, and then I'm going to go share screen. As I say, thank you very much for being so patient with this technology, which is always very dull when it doesn't work for us, great when it does, frustrating when it's not. Okay, so all the slides have engaged. I'm just the last three clicking in, and I'm going to share screen. So let's go with this. Okay, so can I confirm that everyone can see this? Neil, would you like to?
Yeah, it's fine at this end, John. Yeah.
So you can see Journeys in Design. Is that correct?
Yes, I can. I can see your first slide. Obviously,
Okay.
you're all sort of in edit mode, as it were. But
I am, and I'm getting a not responding, but hopefully.
Yes.
There we go.
There we
Great.
go. Right.
Thank you for your patience. I'm starting with this slide. This is a wonderful screen print, hand screen print, which has been done onto Kirkcaldy linen by Lorna Brown. I want to acknowledge the creative inspiration that linen and flax growing has been for her. It's a beautiful image. You can see the serration of the typical mill building and the plant in its different forms. Thanks for that, Lorna. So a wonderful opportunity to present with you today. I don't want to go over what I've already said, but initiatives where design meets well-being and sustainable future. This is an opportunity really to be out and about with folk. And at the end of the day, I use the term creative fellowship. It's coming together with shared interests. And actually that's what we're doing tonight. And walks, talks, exhibitions, workshops, that's what we thrive on. And that's what it's been so wonderful to be able to organize in the last 2 to 3 months when we've been out and about and organizing for this festival. A very brief notion of what we're doing before we look at linen stories. We take a different material with each iteration and explore the material and well-being allied to that. So this year we introduced our city streets exploration of concrete designs to thrive. Last year, although we were in lockdown, we did an online sail around Scotland looking at contemporary design in coastal communities and sustainable design there. But tonight we're focusing on our linen stories. This is Flaxfields one, also by Lorna, which is emblematic of this wonderful story. We sponsor local creatives wherever we visit to offer workshops and offer us talks. And in Kirkcaldy, Lorna, who's originally from Spitalfield in Perthshire, another linen town, developed this during that first workshop in 2018. Welcome to Markinch. Well, Markinch was very welcoming to me. And this is one of the first, this is down, as you'll all know if you know Markinch, down in the middle of town. I knew I'd love Markinch. I saw a bit of guerrilla wool, I think it's called guerrilla textile work on a tree as I came in. I thought, I love this place already. And I do want to mention on that this me with a terrible lockdown haircut, but a wonderful pair of women that I met up at the church. I have to say why I was in Markinch was because I'm on a board of directors at a wonderful parkland development in near Leven called Silverburn Park. I would recommend a stroll right now to Silverburn Park, and it's one of the projects on our festival. But during that time, I was told there were 11 linen mills on the River Leven. So not to be outdone, I thought, we're going to have to find these. And out I went. I went to Markinch because I was told there were several close by. And sure enough, as Christine has confirmed her wonderful research and that we'll discover in our walk, that is the truth. But these two wonderful women met me that first day I was in Markinch. I walked up to the church, an incredible building in itself, looked out across the landscape, and coming out of the church was this lady. We're due to meet again. And I thank her very much for that first introduction and her suggestion that I contact the Markinch Heritage Group. Lady on the left of your screen, also, I don't know if anyone feels the same, but I think when there's a positive energy with a project, wonderful meetings can happen. And this lady is the wife of the last linen mill manager in a now defunct linen mill in Kirkcaldy. What were the chances of me sitting down to chat with a stranger and for her to have such a wonderful linen link? So thank you to these people. You know Markinch better than me, and it's been an absolute joy to walk around it with Christine and Alex Andrews ahead of our walk next weekend. Of course, it's somewhat dominated by Newtown of Glenrothes. Nobody local, I'm sure, is keen to hear that emphasised, but I knew it as an outpost of Glenrothes. How wrong I was, and I have been corrected since. The top map is 1948, before Newtown was developed. It's not well. The definition isn't good, but 100 years early, in 1848, is the second map, thanks to the National Library of Scotland for allowing me to use these tonight. And of course, as it was pointed out to me from a wonderful vantage point by Christine, Bruce and Alex, there we go, Sithrin Mill, Middle Mill, West Mill. There's a paper mill. There's also a bleaching field on the 1848 map. On the 1948 map, Sithrin Mill is disused, and the other two mills still exist. So really a very marked linen history and linen heritage in Markinch. Why was Scotland, why was it the first industry to develop in Scotland? There are no arguments about this among economic historians. Essentially, Scotland and Ireland were given linen as a predominant industry, a textile industry, to really protect the English woolen industry was considered to be the predominant textile industry in England. And so support was offered at the time of the Union in Scotland. And a fund was created by the Board of Fisheries and Agriculture. And that fund went on to support the development of both growing flax and making linen. This, as you can see, is from 1730 to 1815. Great growth in volume. And that was, in fact, the biggest growth in the linen industry that it had seen. After that, it settled and sadly demise, chiefly between the First and Second World Wars, and more sharply afterwards with synthetic fibers. But unfortunately, it was a very declining industry after the First World War. But certainly it was in its heyday at a time when these mills in Markench were also important. The other reason, and many Scottish folk will remember the British Linen banknotes. The last one was published in 1969. The Edinburgh Linen Company was set up by a number of entrepreneurs of the time in 1723. And essentially it was a way to, these entrepreneurs thought, encourage and support the growing of flax, developing of the processes to go from the flax to yarn and the weaving industry as well. It's quite an expensive industry to invest in, and they needed a lot more money than they could generate locally. So these canny entrepreneurs in Edinburgh rechristened themselves the British Linen Company. That essentially became a lending organisation and actually dissociated itself almost completely from the linen industry in the 1780s, and it became the British Linen Bank, incorporated as the third main bank after the Bank of Scotland, the Royal Bank of Scotland. A very significant part of why linen became the first industry of Scotland. We subtitled this talk From Seed to Shelf, and this is an indication of the main flax cultivation in 1780. And I have to acknowledge some wonderful sources here. I hope you can see this book. It's well thumbed and earmarked for me, but Alistair Dury's very significant work, The Scottish Linen Industry, and then separate papers, this in particular, Cultivation of Flax in Scotland, Historical Geography by W.M. Turner. Great reference books. But you can see the main areas of flax cultivation, and there's Fife in the middle, Perthshire, Angus, and up in the Highlands, also important. The rest fairly scattered. And this is according to the old statistical record, and that didn't actually list all the farms. So we're growing flax again, and Christine will be watching. She'll not thank me for the photograph, but I have to thank her. Christine, it's been absolutely wonderful to meet you. Your enthusiasm is fabulous, and you've really taken this project to heart. I have you pictured here behind the flax you've been growing outside 252 Memorial Hall in Markench. And I'm very excited to see the display that you've produced. So flax takes about 100 days to grow, 90 to 100 days. You need to, the field needs to be well weeded initially and for the first 10 days. And then the flax cracks on and it takes all the nutrients, so the weeds don't stand a chance. By about day 60, there's that beautiful blue flower. 100 years ago in Ireland, 200 years ago in Scotland, no one would have grown up without being very familiar with the blue flower across the fields. And that flower only lasts for a couple of days. And then, in fact, you get a beautiful silvery green, which turns silvery seed head, from which we get the linseed, if that's why we're growing the flax. So flax can be grown for the linseed oil, for the seed to plant the next year. It's a perennial. And of course, for the long fibers, and when it grows up, when it's planted en masse in a proper crop field, it grows up very tall and straight. It's a very handsome crop, and the long fibers are what we extract through a series of 6 processes to get the fibers to spin into linen yarn, so it stops being called flax and it's called linen at that stage. So it's a beautiful plant. I saw my first industrially sized field in Belgium in 2018 when I was researching for this project, and really it's very handsome. It grows very tightly together, and I saw it after the flower stage, and it was like a sea of silver, these silver seed heads blowing gently, very beautiful. And in that particular part of Belgium, West Flanders, out from a town called Kortrijk, you can do flax bicycle rides. I mentioned that because I think there is, for Fife in particular, the opportunity to devise some ecotourism related to our heritage in that regard. The man who knows most about growing locally is Ken, and I don't know if he's watching tonight, but another big thank you to Ken. Fife offered and in fact the east coast of Scotland offered good growing conditions. It wasn't that easy a crop, and you certainly have to rotate it. Minimum 3 different, sometimes farmers went up to 7 different crops, and then put the flax back in. It's quite a greedy crop in some regards. But Ken knows most about, of the farmers I've spoken to in Scotland about the vagaries of different plants. Flax plants, and we had a wonderful conversation. And in particular, Ken remembers something rather special. Although Scotland stopped growing flax around the 1820s to any degree, there were wartime reasons why we grew more. So the Crimean War threatened the cheap imports of unprocessed flax that we brought in from Russia and from the Baltic states and the Low Countries. And so the government sponsored the regrowing of flax. And very interestingly, in the First World War, the same thing happened. And in the Second World War, when cotton imports were threatened, and we needed to secure a textile base. Ken, as a small child, after the family would huddle under the stairs when the German bombers had been raiding the Clyde, would come out and he would go down and play in a flax field, and remembers the Second World War flax field just outside Markinch. That's a wonderful memory, and the records are not great on where the government sponsored flax specifically. So Ken's promised me a walk in the fields, the old flax fields. Also, interestingly, some Polish workers that had been helping Ken digging in the area found these seals. And as I say, after about 1820, it became much cheaper for Scotland to import flax. The eastern seaboard meant that was readily available in the same way it wasn't available to Ireland, who continued to grow flax for longer. But these seals are Russian, and they were, I think one says 1886, imported flax from Russia. So those seals are still dug up at different times on Scottish farmland. Very strong development of industry, and possibly, I think essentially the first distributed civil service, stamp masters who required to stamp the flax, stamp the woven linen to say it was good quality in order for it to be sold reputably to different markets. The stamp masters were skilled local weavers able to guarantee quality. And here we see in the close-up the stamp offices for linen cloth in 1820, and there's Markinch. I'm very impressed that Christine and Bruce may have found the Stamp Master House, but we'll call it that fancifully anyway on our walk. And there's a little mason reference to that, masonry reference to that in one of the local houses in Markinch. But there you go, quite a significant distribution suggesting that there was this importance for linen in Fife. And it's interesting to see which towns actually had a local stamp office. So Fife had its ports to export and import. And what we did do very well here was textile production. So we didn't grow the flax terribly well, but we did good things with it. And These stamps, the story goes, the canny farmer, the canny hand loom weavers would make sure the outside cloth on a bale was high quality. And stamp masters caught on to that and insisted that the central coil was stamped in the middle and on the outside round of linen. So the stamp masters, interestingly, this was the first distributed civil service, as was, it's argued, the British Linen Bank, which we mentioned earlier, who had branches. And it may have been that the way they operated meant that the British Linen Bank was the first bank with branches across the country, allied to the linen halls, local markets where the linen was brought. So I mentioned I was really keen to find out if I could find any of these linen mills. And down a road, which you may well know, with a sign for a gym, is this building. And this, in fact, is one of the linen mills on the Leven by Markinch. I'm conscious of my time. I'm sorry about the delay earlier. I don't want to rush too much, but let's press on. Canny folk locally are alive to the contemporary design, if you like, based on heritage. And again, on an extended walk around Markinch, you'll see its heritage in terms of mills and linen represented in new housing developments, all superb luxury developments, of course. So down that bridge, or through that bridge, West Mill. And I wonder, can I pop back to that? Let's see if I put it back in as a duplicate slide. No, I haven't. Let me just go back to that map, if I may. So here we see these mills, and that development is near the West Mill, Cithron Mill and Middle Mill. I think I'd like to mention just the processes that meant Markinch had something to offer. It had a river, and that meant there was lade, and so the power of water could be used. Up until the 1820s, this was a hand loom weaving industry, and there are wonderful examples in Markinch of weavers' cottages, noted because one side from the front door, single window, the other side, two windows, which meant you could put a loom and get plenty of light in to do the work by. And often that was it was an earth floor. The atmosphere had to be kept damp to work with the linen. And it was a man's occupation to weave and a woman's occupation to spin. So the flax was, back in the medieval times, subsistence farming meant most people grew some flax. As it became a money earner, training was required, and you'll know the famous type of linen called damask, which is the internal pattern related to the way the warp is changed. The warp being the vertical structure, thread, yarn, and the weft being the one that goes back and forward. So I love the language associated with linen, and drawboys were the kids in the family. The wife was spinning, the husband was weaving, and the kids were sent up to draw up the warp in different ways, and a complex pattern was created to make damask. Of course, it was all industrialized, particularly with the development of the jacquard loom. And I'm of an age that I remember the miners' strike. Why am I mentioning that? Well, it was an equally huge social change in the 1820s. The weaving was centralized, hand loom weaving centralized in factories, and then mechanized. And not surprisingly, there was a push to develop cheaper labor and a cheaper way of producing the cloth. And women were given largely the charge of these weaving machines, paid at about a fifth the wage of the men. So huge unrest. Men who had been established in families, and often the skills were passed down in families, lost their jobs, and communities were decimated, much in the same way as the miners' communities were decimated in the 1980s. So let's get back. So the mill history, very significant in Markinch, as it is in Fife. In many ways, it's the persistent heritage that is most appealing to me in terms of a festival in Fife. And thank you, Neil, for mentioning that we're just on the cusp of launching tomorrow in Kirkcaldy. This is our logo for the festivals, the first one. We hope to repeat them every 3 years. The periodicity there is because every year we might not quite have enough stories to tell. Every other year doesn't quite give the creative projects that we hope to see happening, called our Flax Futures, doesn't quite give enough time. In Ceres and Burnt Island, we have two wonderful sets of artists, platform studios in Burnt Island, and particularly Susie Redman, who's a contemporary handloom weaver. Stunning work. It's in the exhibition, which is in Kirkcaldy, our hub exhibition, open from 10:30 to 4 o'clock, Friday to Sunday, in an old linen works, Stocks Linen Works in Link Street. In Ceres, we've got two wonderful an artist and her partner designer. That's Kate Downey and Michael Walkover. Our walks have been so wonderful to organise. We've had to postpone Strathmiglo and Falkland. Markinch is next weekend, and the final weekend of the festival is in Dunfermline. Sadly, the walks are sold out, but we do hope to archive them so that the walk is available and hopefully run them again. I mentioned Silverburn, this wonderful flax mill, and I would encourage you to visit. It's open from there's a little cafe there, open from Tuesdays to Sundays. We're running tours around the old flax mill that's there, and to tell that story. Auchtertool House is opening, and the owners there bought the house lock, stock and barrel, including the linen press. So we're raiding the linen press to look at linen and laundry, air your linens in Auchtertool House. And Kirkcaldy, our hub, and I would just like to mention two of our talks. The first I'd like to mention is on Thursday, the 16th of September, and that's in the Old Kirk at 6:30, and it's Making Well with Heritage. This is a wonderful example of participatory art based on a linen heritage, again at Silverburn. And I would thoroughly recommend 3 stonking speakers on the ground in live. And then we have a rather international flavour to our Zoom roundtable Flax Circles, which is subtitled Think Global, Grow Local. And we're looking at the potential of linking across Fife to create a new network of small-scale growers. And we're looking at the potential of flax and heritage of flax to encourage tourism, as I mentioned earlier, and also eco-educational modules. And we're really looking for demonstrator schools, working with existing schools projects in London and in Northern Ireland to see if we can create a schools module on in our own heritage in Fife. So look, I won't get a well-earned rest after a walk with Christine, but again, thank you to Alan, thank you to Christine, thank you to everyone in Markinch who's been so helpful, and thank you very much, Neil, for having me. You'll know that Markinch is on the Pilgrim's Way, and this is a sign suggesting that if you're a weary traveller, a well-earned rest can be had in Markinch. So thanks again for the opportunity. Apologies for the technical hitch. It's been a very interesting evening because I can't see any of you, and I can't see myself, and I can't see Neil, but I can see the screen, and hope you've been able to see it after the wait. And please stay in contact. We're really keen to work with folk on this wonderful heritage, and I look forward to our walk and many more walks to come. Thanks very much.
So I'll just reiterate John's contact details there. If I've got this right, it's Journeys into Design or
Journeys in Design? Yes.
Plural, Journeys. Yeah. So if anybody thinks of any questions later, or they've not logged in to the chat here tonight, then John has kindly agreed to field any questions that way.
Neil, are we back on screen?
We're back on screen.
Great.
Yep.
Lovely.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, just as we were at the beginning, really. So that was fascinating. I mean, I'm learning, and I haven't seen all the work that Christine's done yet. And that's something I think I touched on at the beginning, that there will be an exhibition on Saturday, the 11th of September. As John said, the walk itself, that's fully booked, but to coincide with the walk, there will be an exhibition in the 252 hall from 2 o'clock until 4 o'clock. So even if you can't, if you've not managed to get a place on the walk, you're still welcome to come along to the exhibition and see all the work, all the research that Christine in particular has done. And I'm certainly looking forward to that, because I haven't seen that material yet, but I know it will be substantial, and a lot of detail in there and things that are unknown to me, certainly. So yeah, so we're kind of just waiting, John, to see if anybody wants to ask any
Sure.
questions, and I say that they type that into the chat.
I didn't want to steal Christine's thunder, because I know she's got some great local heritage elements stemming from the walk. The walk is, or our walk is, a great way to experience the locality, of course. So it's a lovely complement to have an exhibition there and to have an active walk afterwards. We're hoping to archive it with some drone footage as well, so we'll be able to present that to the heritage group as a resource, and we just keep tabs on that and let everyone know what's happening.
So there's a question here, John, from Bruce. He's saying that there was a major excavation of a Neolithic Bronze Age henge at Balfarg, which is near Markinch, of course. What evidence do we have of very early flax growing?
Yes, that's a great question. There is evidence in Scotland around the Crannogs of the Iron Age. This is great news for me, that there's this additional excavation, which I don't know about, but certainly you'll know around in Lochleven. Sadly, they lost, there was a fire in the previous Crannog building, or complex, but they have great funding for a new complex, which they're doing. And it's actually quite difficult to know exactly where flax was grown, but on the Crannogs in Scotland, they have been able to do deep soil analysis and draw up the seeds. There are apparently only 3 proven lintels in Scotland, or I should say, the place where the flax was rotted down to release the fibers, and we haven't had a chance to talk about that sort of process. There's only 3 absolutely confirmed, and you need to get your waders on or more soil samples to prove that. I think Christine and I have a wee suspicion there may be one in Markinch itself, but we've yet to prove that, and we might get Historic Environment Scotland in to help us with it.
That sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, that would be another a bit of evidence to keep Markinch sort of in the focus of its flax heritage.
Well, I mean, it really does. I mean, it's a legitimate claim in many ways. One might argue that Fife is absolutely stuffed with small towns that have these heritages, but actually Markinch is right up there. Apart from anything else, what an extraordinary town heritage there is. I mean, the other walks, the chart I saw, the first visit I made, the church on the hill. I mean, it's an exceptional small village. It's beautiful.
So there's no other questions at the moment, John. So we'll maybe just kind of kind of wrap up.
Sure.
But anybody who's watching, either now or the recording, which of course sits on our YouTube channel, will have the opportunity to email
Hugh,
John.
I'm just going to interrupt Neil. Hugh is asking about...
You can see Hugh's question. Good.
Yeah, a great question. And what I really enjoyed working with Christine, not just her accent, but her capacity to draw the international links. And absolutely, Flanders did encourage, we did bring in Belgium, but after that, and more significantly, were the Huguenots that were brought in again in the early 18th century as a result of this special fund, the Act of the Union. And in fact, they set up a little weaving village in Edinburgh named after their town of origin in northern France, in Picardy. And that's called Picardy Place. If you know Edinburgh, you may know that. But they were sent all over Scotland. Women were sent to teach spinning, and there were spinning classes acknowledged all over Scotland, and weaving, of course, as you say. It's not certain how much they contributed. Scotland's weavers were really quite skilled. They didn't have the damask skills, and so often the grand houses and palaces would have been brought in. It would have brought in linens, particularly from the Netherlands. But absolutely, there was a very interesting exchange, and I think that's something that we try and emphasize in Journeys in Design, that migration in this way, and the Huguenots were the first, are considered the first refugees, and that's where the name was coined. Migration is often about technology transfer, and certainly weaving skills in Spitalfields in London, goldsmithing, Coventry, ribbon making. So a number of different skills were brought in with the Huguenots. And before that, probably, I think, from Belgium, from Flanders as well. We've got a wonderful link with Kortrijk to a museum there called Textuur. And I would recommend anyone who's traveling in Belgium to pay a visit, a real destination museum.
Another question that's come in, John, offline. So in connection with the flax and linen that I think you said started to be imported around 1820, did the Corn Laws not make that a more expensive option, or was flax exempt?
Entirely separate. I mean, certainly there were a number of controls on linen, both from Scotland to England and rivalry from Ireland. The Corn Laws didn't impact directly the flax. And actually, I implied that I should have made more explicit. It wasn't that we hadn't imported before then. It had been an exchange. And in fact, there's a link between a port called Veer in Middelburg, the sort of lump that sits on top of Holland. And there's a wonderful Act of Parliament. And it links Veer and Kouros in Fife in terms of the exchange of goods from the 1550s right until that treaty ended at Union and beyond. And we would exchange whale oil and salmon, barrels of salmon, and woven cloth in return for flax that was imported even back then. So it was simply that it was much cheaper for it became cheaper for Scotland to import than to grow its own flax. I don't know of an impact of the Corn Laws. I don't think that's a related issue.
Okay. So to say, if there's no more questions, we'll just kind of wrap things up. But just want to thank you again, John, for doing the talk. And of course, wish you great success with the festival.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you.
I'm sure it's going to be something that people are. I think you're going to get a good crowd, a good draw. I think it's going to be a good draw. I think. Not just
well, I hope so, and I can only thank again the communities throughout Fife, and in particular in Markinch, for being so supportive of the idea, and hopefully we'll have further to come.
Okay. So I'm just going to end the broadcast just in the last few seconds, just seeing if there's anything else comes up. if you could just hang on a couple of minutes, John.
Sure.
Once I end the broadcast, we'll still be in the studio. Okay, so thanks everyone for watching. As I say, our next talk may be in real life. Obviously, the COVID situation keeps changing as well. But as I said at the beginning, if you're a member and you have the little questionnaire, I'd appreciate if you could respond if you haven't done so, because that obviously informs where we go. Bruce is just saying finally that the blue flowers are out. So, well, absolutely.
Great news. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. Yeah. Well done. Well done.
And John showed that Christine with the flowers at the 252 hall, but some folk may have noticed they're also at the board that John showed, the one that's across from Greens and Markins as well. So that's great. That seems like a good place to end this broadcast. Thanks again, John, and if you just hang on a minute. Thanks, everyone.